Hello and welcome back to Nolan Financial Radio. My name is Tara Nolan from Nolan Financial. If you're new to the show, welcome. We're so glad to have you. The show is all about education and kind of letting you know what's in the realm of possible. It was really interesting. I was talking with a new client this morning and showing some of the advanced strategies that I use. And he was kind of like, how come I didn't already know about this? I'm like, I said, exactly. That's why I'm writing a book. And that's why I'm telling you, because there are things that are available to you, but you don't know what you don't know. Right. So anyway, today's show is all about education. And if you're listening, I would say, please feel free to give Chris and I a call at 719-210-4242. And definitely visit our website, www.nolanfinancialpartners.com. While you're there, you can check out the radio show page. We record all these shows and we do educational topics from Medicare to Social Security to 401ks, IRAs, kind of if it's a financial question, we've talked about it. So you can dig in right there and get yourself spun up. But again, please don't hesitate to reach out to Chris and I to set up a face-to-face or virtual meeting. The number is 719-210-4242, or you can go to our website and book a discovery call right through the website. So we're going to be talking today about some financial myths around Social Security. I know it's hard to believe that there might be something you've heard about Social Security that's not quite true, but we're gonna dive into that. But before we jump into the myths about Social Security, let me say hello to my amazing co-host, Tony Shore. Tony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Tara, and I love the theme that you use for the YouTube version of the show is amazing. The video version for our radio listeners, you should check it out. It rotates. You have like 3 different songs that you use for your theme, but today's was just I was rocking out doing the air guitar, So that was awesome. I always love that. That gets me fired up for the show, but it's great to be here with you, Tara. I've had such a crazy week. I can't tell you whether it was good or bad because I haven't had time to stop and think about it. So, you know what I mean?
I do, Tony. And actually, I was just thinking about that. I've really been plugging into some new techniques for managing stress. And I realized, like, for me, like one of the worst things I do is when I'm making something happen, before it's even like happened, I'm already reviewing in my head, like all the ways I screwed it up, all the ways I could have done it better. And I'm like, okay, I'm creating my own stress for something that's not even real. So I'm trying to take that deep breath and go, just do your thing, be the best person you can be, let the chips fall where they're going to fall, and good things will happen.
Yeah. And another strategy you could use is if there's something coming down the pike or something that needs to be done that's stressing you out or on your mind, just hand it off to Chris and say, you deal with this. And then you forget all about it. Could that work?
That works sometimes.
I mean, your husband and business partner, you got to, put a little bit of that burden on those manly shoulders of Chris's, right?
I do, but it's
you're good at delegating. I'm sure you do. You run a tight ship there.
I do, but when you're with your spouse, I've had to ask Chris this question. I don't know if you've ever had to do that with your spouse. You said you agreed, but does that mean you're actually going to do it? Or are you just agreeing?
Right. So I haven't had to do that with my spouse, but Sarah has had to do that with me many times. Yes. That's what she questioned. She goes, can you do this? And I'm like, sure. And then there's a pause and she goes, no, I really need you to do this.
Right. Quick follow-up. Are you actually going to do it though?
Yeah. Are you actually going to do it? So today, it sounds like you've got an interesting topic lined up for us. Where do you want to begin with this?
Well, I want to begin with a stat because I think it's really interesting. So according to AARP, Social Security pays out almost $100 billion a month to about 65 million retirees.
Wow.
So it affects a lot of people. Yeah. And this 2020 study referenced by AARP indicates that about 90% of U.S. adults support the program. So, in this day and age, hallelujah. Have you seen 90% of the people get behind anything?
No. 90% of the people to be doing something is pretty amazing.
And so it just means Social Security is kind of a part of everyone's life at some level. And so I love doing this kind of show, Tony. I actually have a whole chapter in my book where I talk about financial myths, because there's these things that you think are true. And the hard part about myths is there's always that little grain of truth in there.
Sure.
So it kind of sounds like it's true. And this kind of show is what I love to do, is go, hey, have you heard this? Let's talk about what the ground truth is, so that you're not making a decision based on partial information.
Yeah, that's true. And boy, you do hear a lot of things, especially about Social Security, when people are telling you, here's when you should take it, or here's why Social Security isn't going to be there, or here's why it is. And so you hear so many things about Social Security. I find that interesting, and I think it's a great topic. And I think it's natural for people to wonder if it's going to be there, first of all. But why do you think the myth of, why do you think this myth is out there and refuses to die, Tara?
Well, like the first one is just that people think Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, which kind of makes sense, right? Because if you look at if you get a W-2 pay stub, it shows the money that's being taken out for Social Security. So you are paying as you go.
Sure.
And so people think, well, the program won't run out of money because everybody's paying as they go. And that's kind of how the concept is, right? Is while you're working, you pay in, and then when you retire, you get the benefits because, the younger people coming behind you are paying in. Right. And so I think it's one of those myths that, kind of the way it's set up, that's how it works. But here's the thing, because Social Security is not going broke, but it does face some challenges, right? Because well, and we've all heard about the generations. There's like the boomer generation, there's Generation X, there's, the millennials. There's differences in the sizes of generations, right? And so the boomers are retiring now, and that was a big generation. Now the millennials have finally come along, and they are pretty big. But, if you look around society, things are shifted, right? How many people are now being entrepreneurs and doing their side hustles and working for themselves and maybe not even paying into Social Security? So
that's true. That's true. The little side hustles and all the cash. And so people working on their own, they don't pay Social Security on the money they get from those side hustles. That's the problem. Yeah.
And so it's just like, the basic math for things is, if we have a population that's drawing more Social Security than people are paying in, then that's going to start to get rid of that surplus.
Yeah. So it's crazy. But they are concerned because of the solvency of Social Security, and they've talked about that, right?
They do talk about it, and here's the thing. Actually, I talk about this in my book as well. Is Social Security. Right now, there's money in there to pay people about 78% of their benefits all the way until about 2034-ish.
Yeah.
And so the thing is Congress, it's up to Congress to figure out what are they going to do. Yeah. And the thing is you go historically back, there's a couple times where Congress has already intervened in Social Security. One of the things that's happened is they've shifted the date that you reach your full retirement age. There's, they can do a lot of things to change it. So I feel like Congress is probably not going to let Social Security fail.
No. In fact, I remember when I was a kid in the 80s, they said by like 1994, it wouldn't be solvent. But then Congress passes laws. They raised the, full retirement age and things like that, and to keep it solvent. And they'll do that again. That's kind of the third rail of politics, they say, Social Security. And they're not going to let it run out of steam. They're going to keep it solvent. Now, your check might be a little smaller, or you might have to wait longer to get more, but it'll be there. There will be some type of Social Security benefit.
And it's just the reality of what's happening. When FDR started Social Security, people would die at 63.
Yeah.
That was kind of, people died young. We're living now till 83. And so
at least.
There's people now, Tony, that are on Social Security as long as they worked. And so there is just some math that has to get involved. But like you said, I mean, Congress members like to get reelected, and advocating for Social Security is probably a good platform. So I don't think we're in danger of it like disappearing. But I mean, there are some things that are going to have to be looked at for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think most members of Congress, Tara, they want to get reelected. And advocating for Social Security is probably a good way to do that, right?
Exactly. So, so that brings us to the next myth. A lot of people feel like retirement happens at 65. And
Right.
it's easy to conflate it, right? Because 65 is when Medicare starts. 65, just for a lot of years, I mean, for most of my life, as a kid in my adult life, 65 is kind of retirement age. I can tell you a lot of my clients just say, well, I'm 65, it's time to retire.
Yeah.
Like, well, there's no, especially as pensions have started to go away, 65 is no longer, it's just that historical memory, but that's not really grounded in truth.
Yeah, and the only reason I can see why that number would have become the number 65 is because that's when Medicare kicks in.
Right.
And a lot of people feel like that sounds like a good age. It's a nice round number, 65. So, it's pretty close. So, yeah, I think it just kind of became the rule of thumb that 65 is retirement age.
And in 1935, when Social Security was enacted, 65 was the age. But that was in 1935. But decades later, they changed the minimum eligibility drop to 62 so that you could take a reduced benefit early, and 65 was a full retirement age. But in 1983, again, back to our previous conversation, how Congress can make changes to help keep it solvent. In 1983, the full retirement age went up to reduce costs.
Yes.
So
that's what I remember. Yeah.
2002 was the last year when people who were 65 got their full retirement benefit at 65. So now there's a table, right? There's always a table.
And now it's 66 and 67. For me, it would be 67 right now, unless they change it. And I think, usually they go by birth dates, and you're probably grandfathered in. So hopefully my full retirement age is still going to stay 67, but you never know. They're going to raise that to 68 or 69. People are living longer and longer. Some people are working into their 70s, right?
Exactly. And we're going to get into some of those myths, right, about Social Security and working. So that was a nice lead in there.
Well, that's awesome. And I didn't know that all those changes to the full retirement age, and that's what they call that full retirement, 65, then 66. And I know my full retirement age, which is 67 in some months. It changes by months. It's not just by year either. It's like a sliding scale.
It is, Tony. And so you've kind of led into a great thing. Is one of the things that Chris and I do with our clients is we run a Social Security maximization report. So for anyone listening to the show, if you're not sure when your full retirement age is, or like what's the optimized, should you take it early or should you wait? Give Chris and I a call at 719-210-4242. That's 719-210-4242 to run that Social Security maximization report, because you don't have to guess. We can actually run the report and look at it. And a lot of times, if you're married and you have a spouse, we can actually show with your combined benefits, like what's going to be the best way to take that, so that at least that's not part of the guessing game of retirement.
Yeah, I love that report, and you've talked about that before. And what's great is it's based on the person's individual information, or if you're a couple, you and your spouse's information, and it takes into consideration spousal benefits and strategies, filing strategies, as well as your current age. And so and your family's longevity. It takes into account a lot of information to find your personal sweet spot, because, your neighbor might say, oh, you got to take it when you're 62, or my brother-in-law took it when he was 67 and that worked out good for him. But everybody's situation is different. It might be 66 and 3 months for you. It might have been 62 and 6 months for them. So I like the fact that there's a report, and you've told me before that report runs 20,000 different calculations. So it's proprietary software, and I know you're willing to run it for people you meet with, and there's no cost to that meeting. And so I encourage our listeners to pick up the phone and call you and Chris and set up that complimentary consultation. What's the number one more time before we go on?
Sure, Tony. The number is 719-210-4242. It's 719-210-4242.
All right. So, what's the next myth, Tara, that you want to talk about regarding Social Security that's out there?
Well, the next myth is this thing that the annual cost of living adjustment, or COLA, is automatic. And, by law, the benefits have to be adjusted annually to keep up with inflation, but that doesn't mean you're going to get a jump in COLA every single year. And this is the frustrating part, because, you can hear sometimes on the radio, well, there's not been any inflation, or inflation is low, or it doesn't seem to always correspond to how much it costs you to go buy a gallon of milk.
Right. Right. And especially now, inflation is actual inflation the government's version of inflation, and the COLA is high, let alone actual inflation. What you're really paying out there has been bad. So COLA, cost of living adjustments, are a good thing, but usually they don't even keep up with inflation, do they?
They don't. And, COLA, there's a specifically defined federal index of prices for certain consumer goods and services, and it's called the CPI-W. And so Social Security benefits are adjusted according to changes in the CPI-W from the third quarter of one year to the third quarter of the next year. But that may or may not correspond to how it's impacting you. The things that impact us in terms of inflation is how much does it cost to fill up my gas tank? What does it cost to buy my groceries? Or get a haircut downtown? All those kind of things that you do. For me as an individual, that's what inflation is.
Yeah.
But
I think that's important to understand. And you're right. There are a lot of misconceptions about the cost of living adjustment, and it's not automatic. You don't automatically get it each year.
You don't. But in 2021, the CPI-W showed a 5.9% jump in prices in that index measurement. So the benefits are going to go up this year.
Yeah, that's good. So if there's no price jump, there's no jump in the COLA. But this past year, there was a 5.9% jump, even by the government's low calculations.
Right.
So that's good that the benefits went up 5.9%. That's I heard that's the most they've went up since, I think, the 84, like 40 years.
It's really interesting because, that formula obviously doesn't show a measurable jump every year. So and it kind of says, well, we're not really having inflation. So when those months happen, your check isn't going to be bigger. But since the current formula that's being used went into effect, the scenario has played out 3 times in 2010, 2011, and 2016.
So there were no cost of living adjustments those years.
Right. So regardless of whether or not the formula calls for an increase in benefits, the process is going to be automatic, but it's got to get through that formula to show, okay, we're going to have to do a jump.
But that doesn't mean people weren't paying more for things in those years, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Just by the government's, the algorithm they use, or whatever you call it, the formula, I should say.
Well,
and that
it just goes back to that whole concept, Tony, and I know we've done a show on it, where the stock market is not the economy.
Yeah.
And the stock market may be going up or down, but the economy may be doing something. And it's actually interesting, when the economy is doing poorly, the stock market actually tends to do really well, because when the economy is doing poorly, people put their money in the market. So it's kind of a false equivalency to go, well, the market's doing fine, I should be doing fine.
Right. In fact, the proof is in the pudding. What you just said is so true, because just this past January, the beginning of this year, the beginning of 2022, the markets were really bad. They've been really volatile. They had 3-4 weeks of they went down. The markets were down, and then the economy numbers came out, and it's strongest it's been in years. The actual economy is strong. People are spending money. There's a lot of money out there in the economy. Unemployment is low, so the economy is strong right now, but the markets have been super volatile and bad. So that kind of goes to show, and I've never really thought about that. I'm glad you brought that up. And that's another misconception. People, the stock market is not the economy. That's great information. So let's keep moving. One more time, though, for our listeners out there, because I know that Social Security maximization report is great, and you're willing to run that for our listeners if they set up a complimentary consultation. There's no obligation. What's that phone number again, Tara?
Sure, Tony. That number is 719-210-4242. It's 719-210-4242. And I love doing that report, Tony, because it's a great jumping off point to talk about, are you set up for success in retirement, and make sure you're not going to run out of money and you're going to be able to do the things you want to do.
Right. Well, and during today's show, you've been looking at some of these commonly held myths when it comes to Social Security. For a lot of retirees, Social Security is a key component of their retirement strategy. So I think that naturally is going to increase anxiety about the program and its future. So let's keep this going. What's the next Social Security myth you have for us, Tara?
Well, and here's the next myth, right? And this is where we get into, we talk about money as way more emotion than math, is there's a myth that
Right.
members of Congress don't have to pay into Social Security. And, you know, it's been a complaint that members of Congress don't have to pay into Social Security, so they don't give it attention. And because, you know, right, what affects you gets looked at. And it is a frustration, right? When we see our members of Congress gridlocked and not getting things done for us, the people, and we go, you know, you guys are all getting your paycheck. What about us? You're taking care of us. But here's the good news with that myth is that changed in 1984. So it was true for a long time, but in 1984, members of Congress have now been part of the program, because before 1984, Congress was part of the civil service retirement system. But in 1984, they are now covered by the same system. So they have skin in the game, if you will.
Good. Well, I'm glad you cleared that one up, because I think it's a myth I'd heard many times, and I wasn't honestly sure if they did currently pay. And so that's good that you cleared that one up. I have heard that actually a lot. Oh, Congress doesn't even have to pay into Social Security and they don't care about it. But yeah, that's a good point. Now they have to pay in, which is good. Everyone who's working should have to pitch in, I think.
I mean, that just makes sense to me. I mean, we are a democracy, so there are some things we do together. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
So here's the next myth. And this is the one I think that really gets people worried, is the myth that the government's going to dip into Social Security to fund other government programs.
Oh, I've heard that a lot from my parents. My mom and dad always say, the government's stealing money from Social Security.
Well, and it's hard because it's not altogether untrue, but it's not quite true.
Great.
So for Social Security, if you don't know this, there's actually two different trust funds that pay out. One is for retirees, and then one is separate, and it is actually paid out for people with disabilities. And so they're not part of the government fund. And typically what's happened is actually the fund that pays for disabilities is the one that's had a little more trouble than the one for retirees.
Right.
But here's the thing. So Social Security's tax revenue, it's invested in the U.S. Treasury securities. And so like with other Treasury Department bonds, the government, you know, can spend the money on numerous programs. But like any bondholder, the Treasury does have to pay the money back with interest. So Social Security redeems the securities to meet its responsibilities. So the borrowing power, the idea that the government is just taking money out and leaving IOUs, that's not quite true. The government has always repaid that money in full.
That's good. That's good. Well, and I know people who essentially view Social Security as a personal retirement savings account. So where does that fall into myth versus reality? Is Social Security my own personal retirement savings account that I'm just putting money into and it'll be there when I retire?
Right. So it kind of seems like that, right? Because they're taking money out of your paycheck every month and putting it in. So, but the thing is it's not going into a personal account for you. It's going into the general pot and again, it's that whole large social contract that you pay in while you're working. And then when you retire, the generation behind you is going to pay in, and that's how it's going to work. But yeah, there's not a direct correlation to I put this much money in and I'm going to get this much money out. And so it's actually going to be based on it is based on though how much you've paid in. So if you've paid in every year your whole working life, you're going to get a much higher benefit than somebody who missed a lot of years. So Tony, this is a big thing I look at for a lot of moms, right? That they work for a little bit, then they take time out for their kids, and then they go back to work. And so there's gap years.
Yeah.
And we really have to go back and look and see, you know, what is their Social Security and what are they going to earn? And that will really affect how they decide to pull their Social Security, because it's just life there's a lot of different things in life pulling us different directions. And so taking time out to raise your kids, it is going to impact your Social Security potentially.
Sure. So what level of income are we talking about here? Because that's another thing I've heard is people will say, well, I can live off my Social Security, but how much are we really talking about here?
Well, and then this is another thing that I do a lot of education with my clients and show them. In 1935, Social Security was designed to keep elderly people from starving. It was never designed to be a retirement account. And what we've seen happen is in 1970, when they started getting rid of pensions and shifting towards the 401k model, then people were getting to retirement age and saying, I'm retiring, where's my pension? And they didn't realize, like, there's no pension. Your 401k is it. So a lot of people in their head just started going, well, Social Security is my pension. And so this is a really important conversation I have with people, Tony, when we look at their overall financial plan. Social Security is nice because you get it based on what you paid in. Your health doesn't matter, so you don't have to pass any kind of physical to get the money, but it's a part of your financial plan, and it's not your entire financial plan. And so it's really important to make sure that you're not basing what life is going to be like in retirement on what your Social Security is, because it's going to be not very great, because Social Security it never was intended to be a retirement.
Yeah. And I've heard the figure 40%. Like right now, experts and government and the Social Security Administration said, really, it's going to provide no more than 40% of your pre-retirement earnings.
Best case
Scenario, it will provide 40% of your pre-retirement earnings. So that's not, you don't want to take a 60% or 50, a 60% pay cut, right? In retirement, you can't live on that. So that's good to know. Well, here's something that I've heard a number of times through the years. This one, as I believed this, I had heard this, and that is you don't pay taxes on your Social Security benefit. You would assume you would not, but tell us, is that myth or reality?
You do pay taxes on your Social Security benefit.
Yeah.
And it's hard because it doesn't make sense. You're like, okay, I paid Social Security, I got taxed to pay it, and then they're going to pay me, but then I have to pay a tax. It's like, and here's the thing that you need to understand about money is essentially money is a social contract, and keeping it moving is what keeps everything working. And so you put money into the system, and then people get paid their Social Security, then you pay a little tax on it. It keeps that money moving, and it's that liquidity part of your financial equation. But yeah, it's absolutely true, Tony. And we sit down with clients because when people I have a lot of people that go, well, I'm 65, I can retire now, and I'm going to start my Social Security. And we have to talk about it because when you take Social Security prior to your full retirement age, which for most people is now 66 or 67, you're going to pay some tax on it.
Yeah.
And so we have to look at that individually, one-on-one. And I've had several clients go, oh, yeah, well, I don't know that I want to retire.
Exactly.
Even to the point of just pushing it 6 months.
Yeah.
Because it makes a difference.
Right. Well, we're out of time, Tara. It flew by really quick. Before we go, give that phone number one more time.
Sure. So, Tony, the number is 719-210-4242. Give Chris and I a call to set up that discovery meeting, complimentary, and get your Social Security maximization report. And then we can look to make sure that everything in your financial world is working together to set you up for success. So that number is 719-210-4242.
All right. Thanks, Tara. And that does it for today's episode of Nolan Financial Radio with our host, Tara Nolan.
Join us soon for another episode of Nolan Financial Radio. Take care, and we'll talk with you next time.